5 women were cast out into the storm, abandoned to die in the snow, until a lonely rancher crossed their path. But fate had far more in store than just survival. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. The storm did not come suddenly, it crept, whispering through the branches, gathering its breath until the sky itself bent heavy under the weight of snow. A line of wagons creaked forward through the wilderness, wheels sinking into the white crust, horses snorting clouds of steam. The settlers muttered among themselves, words sharp as stones, faces carved with suspicion. Their eyes did not wander to the 5 young women walking beside the train, except in disdain. It was already decided. These women were a burden, a curse, a problem to be cut loose. Hannah clutched her thin shawl tighter, lips trembling as the cold bit into her skin. She was the quiet one, always steady, always holding her words close. Next to her, Clara's defiance burned brighter than the storm itself, her eyes dark and fierce as she spat curses under her breath at the men who looked at them with disgust. Sophia stumbled but forced herself upright, refusing to fall before those who had already judged her as weak. Emma, barely more than a girl, clung to her sister's arm, trying to be brave while tears stung her frozen cheeks. And Greta, the eldest by only a year, carried herself with a motherly strength, holding Emma against her side and whispering comfort through lips that shook from cold. The decision came without warning. A wheel broke on one of the wagons, an ox collapsed, and a child somewhere in the train coughed with fever. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. Bad luck. Strange women. Useless mouths. By nightfall, the whispers had hardened into something crueler. Orders were barked. Strong hands shoved. And the 5 women found themselves cast down into the snow, their belongings ripped from their grip, their voices swallowed by the hiss of the storm. No mercy, no goodbye, just the snap of reins, the hiss of wheels, and the slow retreat of the wagons into the endless white. Clara screamed after them until her voice cracked, her fury shredded into nothing by the wind. Emma sobbed, clutching at Greta's coat as if her sister alone could anchor her to life. Hannah pressed her lips together, her silence sharper than any cry, while Sophia sank to her knees, snow clinging to her skirts, her breath coming shallow and ragged. Greta bent down, pulling Sophia up, forcing her to stand. "We keep moving," she whispered, though her own eyes betrayed fear. The storm deepened. Snow stung their skin like knives, lashes froze stiff, fingers numbed until they could not feel the ground beneath them. Minutes stretched into hours. They stumbled toward a cluster of dark pines, but even there, the wind hunted them, tearing at branches and shaking ice down onto their heads. By night, their bodies huddled in a hollow of snow, pressed close, breath shallow, hearts thundering with the knowledge that this might be the last warmth they would ever know. Emma's sobs grew weaker, her voice nothing more than a whimper. Sophia's eyes closed more often than they opened, her lips blue. Clara cursed until even her anger broke into silence. Hannah, still, said nothing, only stared into the storm as if willing it to end. Greta rocked her sister gently, whispering, "Don't sleep, Emma. Don't you dare close your eyes." The storm's roar filled the night, and then another sound cut through it. A rhythm, heavy and deliberate, hooves crunching on frozen ground. At first it seemed like a dream, the kind a dying mind conjures when hope slips too far away. But the glow of a lantern appeared, flickering through the trees like a wandering star. A horse emerged, chestnut and broad-shouldered, steam curling from its nostrils. The rider sat tall, hat pulled low, shoulders broad beneath a patched coat. He was not old, perhaps in his early 30s, but his face carried the marks of solitude and struggle. His name was Daniel, though the women did not know it yet. He might have ridden on. He might have mistaken them for shadows in the storm. But then he heard it, Emma's faint whimper, carried thin across the wind. He reined his horse hard, scanning the trees. Once more, the sound came. Not animal. Human. Fading. Swinging down from his horse, lantern in hand, Daniel pressed forward, boots crunching in the snow. At first, There was nothing but white drifts and broken branches. Then 5 pale faces lifted from the snow, ghostly, eyes hollow, bodies trembling on the edge of collapse. They looked at him as if he were another vision, another trick of the storm. Clara forced her raw throat to rasp out a word, just one. Please. Daniel's jaw tightened. He saw their hands, raw and red. Their lips, cracked and blue. Their bodies sagging against one another, clinging to life by sheer will. He dropped the bundle of firewood from his saddle, moved to the nearest woman, and without hesitation lifted her into his arms. She gave a cry, half relief, half pain. One by one, he carried them to his horse. One by one, he hauled them through the storm toward the dim shadow of a cabin barely visible through the blur of snow. His steps faltered, his body strained, but he pressed forward with the grim determination of a man who had chosen not to turn away. When the door to the cabin finally creaked open, the women collapsed inside like rag dolls dropped from the hands of fate. Daniel struck flint, coaxed fire to life, spread blankets over them, and stripped ice-stiff boots from their feet. The flames rose, licking shadows from the walls, casting light across faces that had nearly surrendered to the dark. For the first time since their exile began, the 5 women drew breaths that did not feel like their last. And Daniel, silent, stern, yet unshakable, kept his rifle propped by the door, his eyes fixed on the storm outside. For cruelty rarely ended with the first blow, and somewhere beyond the snow, the men who had cast these women away were still out there. The fire crackled in the stove, a stubborn flame that beat back the cold pressing against the cabin walls. For the 5 women, warmth felt like a miracle, yet it did not erase the fear that clung to them. Their bodies thawed, but their eyes remained wide, as if they expected the storm to open the door and drag them back into the snow. Daniel moved with steady purpose, feeding the fire, pouring thin broth into tin cups, setting them gently within reach. He did not linger near them. Instead, he kept close to the door, his rifle resting across his knees, gaze fixed on the world beyond the frost-bitten window. Clara, still fierce despite the tremor in her hands, broke the silence first. You didn't have to stop, she rasped, her voice raw from cold. Most men wouldn't have. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, but he said nothing. His silence stretched heavy in the room. Greta laid a hand on Clara's arm, urging her to quiet. He did stop, Greta whispered. And that's all that matters. Henna sipped carefully at her broth, studying the man with eyes sharp as glass. She saw the way his jaw clenched every time the wind howled, the way his shoulders remained tight, as if bracing for a blow. This was not just a man with a good heart, this was someone who expected trouble to follow at any moment. And perhaps, she thought, he was right. Sophia leaned against the wall near the fire, her body weak, but her eyes darting off into the shadows beyond the window. Every gust of wind made her flinch. Emma clung to Greta, shivering less now but still trembling, as if the warmth could not reach all the way into her bones. Daniel's voice finally broke the silence, low and rough as gravel. Eat what you can. Rest while you can. The storm won't hide you forever. The words chilled them more than the snow outside. Clara's hands balled into fists. They left us to die, she hissed. If they come back, I'll tear their throats out myself. Greta pulled her close, shaking her head. Don't say such things. Anger won't keep us alive. But Clara only glared, fire still burning in her eyes. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. The storm raged, clawing at the shutters, rattling the roof. But inside, the fire grew steady, spreading warmth across the small room. For a moment, they could almost believe they were safe. Almost. It was Hannah who noticed it first. A faint sound, buried beneath the scream of the wind, the rhythm of hooves. Her head snapped toward the window, breath catching. Someone's out there, she whispered. Daniel was already moving. He pushed to his feet, rifle in hand, every muscle tense. The women froze where they sat, eyes wide, hearts pounding. The crunch of hooves grew louder, deliberate, circling the cabin. Then voices, muffled by snow, carried on the wind. Clara's defiance cracked into a hiss. They came back. Daniel held up a hand for silence. The voices outside grew clearer. We know you're in there. One barked, rough and sharp with authority. Send them out. They're cursed. You'll damn yourself keeping them. Emma whimpered, pressing her face into Greta's shoulder. Greta wrapped her arms tight around her sister. whispering prayers that trembled on her lips. Sophia's eyes darted wildly, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched the hem of her skirt. Clara grabbed the iron poker from beside the fire and held it like a weapon. Hannah, though pale, stood tall, moving closer to Daniel's side, her gaze steady on the door. The pounding came next, heavy fists slamming against the wood, shaking the frame. The cabin seemed to groan under the impact. "Open up," another voice shouted. "You've no right to them. They belong to the wagon. To us." Daniel's reply was silence. He stood just to the side of the door, rifle ready, his breathing calm, his eyes steady. At last, he spoke, his voice low but carrying through the storm. "They walked away from your wagons. They're not yours anymore." The laughter that followed was cruel, sharp as ice. "They're cursed, rancher. And now you are too. Hand them over, or we'll burn you out." Inside the cabin, the women clung to each other. Every word was a knife pressed against wounds still raw. Greta closed her eyes, whispering, "Please, God." Clara's knuckles whitened around the poker. Sophia wept silently. Emma shook, her breath coming fast and shallow. Hannah, though trembling, lifted her chin, standing close enough to Daniel that the firelight caught both their faces. Daniel did not waver. "Then you'd better be ready to freeze with us," he said. The storm seemed to still for a moment, the silence after his words heavy enough to crush the air. Then came the sound of retreat hooves turning, voices fading into the night. But the silence they left behind was not peace. It was only a pause, a promise that cruelty had not finished with them yet. Daniel returned to his chair, rifle across his knees. His eyes remained fixed on the door. The women huddled closer to the fire, their whispers sharp and desperate. "They'll come back," Clara muttered. "Next time, with fire." Greta stroked Emma's hair, her own eyes wet. "Then we'll face it together." Hannah glanced at Daniel, her voice low but steady. "You risk everything for us." "What?" He did not look at her. His answer was silence, heavier than words. The storm howled, shaking the cabin walls. And inside, 6 souls, 5 abandoned women, and 1 lonely rancher waited for the night to decide whether it would keep them safe or deliver them back into the hands of cruelty. Morning came gray and heavy, the storm's fury dulled but not gone. Snow pressed against the cabin walls, half burying the windows, while a weak silver light crept through frost-latticed glass. Inside, the fire smoldered, its glow stubborn but fading. The women stirred one by one, stiff from exhaustion, their movements slow, their eyes darting to the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Daniel was already awake. He sat by the stove sharpening his knife on a whetstone, each scrape echoing through the silence like a promise. His hat hung from a peg, his rifle leaned within reach, and though his face revealed little, the tight set of his shoulders betrayed that he hadn't slept. Clara stretched her arms, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles, then scowled toward the window. "They'll come back. Men like that don't just give up." Her words hung sharp in the cold air. Greta hushed her, offering Emma a small piece of bread. The younger girl nibbled at it without appetite, her lips pale, her eyes haunted. Sophia sat close to the fire, rubbing her fingers as if trying to chase away the memory of frostbite. It was Hannah who broke the silence directed toward him. "You could have left us there," she said quietly, her voice neither accusation nor gratitude. "Why didn't you?" Daniel's hand stilled over the blade for a moment, then resumed its steady motion. "No one should die like that," he muttered. His words were simple, yet they landed with a weight that silenced the room. The women exchanged glances, each reading their own meaning into his answer. Clara saw defiance. Greta, mercy. Sophia, a fragile shield of safety. Emma clung to it like a lifeline. Hannah studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She wondered what kind of scars lay beneath such silence, what battles this man had fought with no witnesses but the snow. The hours crawled. They busied themselves with small tasks, sweeping the floor, mending a blanket, stirring the embers to life. The cabin became less foreign, though never fully safe. Daniel moved among them without words, showing Sophia how to place wood to coax flame higher, handing Greta a bucket of snow to melt for water, steadying Emma when she stumbled from fatigue. At one point, when Hannah tried to drag a log too heavy for her slight frame, Daniel caught it before it toppled. For a heartbeat, their hands touched on the rough bark. Neither spoke, neither pulled away, but the silence between them thickened, humming with something neither could yet name. By afternoon, the air grew warmer inside, though the storm outside lingered like a predator waiting for weakness. They gathered around the table for a thin stew Greta had coaxed together from his supplies: carrots, beans, and broth. Steam rose into their faces, softening their features. Yet conversation came haltingly, voices brittle. Clara slammed her spoon down suddenly. They left us for dead. Just like that. Tossed us out because some fool thought we were cursed. Her voice shook, but it carried fire. The room fell silent. Greta murmured. They said it was for the good of the wagon, too many mouths, not enough food. Her words trembled, a memory that still stung. Hannah lifted her head slowly, her voice sharp and steady. No, it was because the child died. They needed someone to blame, and we were the nearest scapegoats. Daniel's jaw tightened. He set his spoon down with deliberate calm, though his hand whitened around it. Men blame what they don't understand, he said at last. His voice was deep, rough, but there was steel beneath it. The women stared at him. It was the first time he had offered anything more than necessity, the first words that revealed a glimpse of the man behind the silence. Clara's eyes burned with agreement. Greta bowed her head in a quiet prayer. Sophia's lips trembled. Emma leaned closer to her sister. Hannah watched Daniel with a mixture of respect and suspicion, as if trying to decide whether his truth came from pity or from a past scarred as deeply as theirs. Night fell again, heavy and restless. They gathered nearer to the fire, unwilling to let distance separate them from its glow. The storm clawed once more at the shutters, rattling the door. Greta hummed a hymn under her breath, her voice soft and trembling, yet steady enough to soothe. Clara leaned against her shoulder, eyes still sharp even as sleep tugged at her. Sophia curled beside Emma, who at last drifted into uneasy dreams. Daniel sat apart, oiling his rifle with calm precision. Yet when the hymn faded into silence, his gaze lifted toward the 5 figures resting in his cabin. For years, solitude had been his only companion, silence his only shield. But as he watched them breathe scarred, frightened, alive, the weight of his loneliness pressed differently. Not lighter, but no longer unbearable. Toward dawn, Hannah rose quietly, her bare feet padding across the wood. She peered out through a crack in the shutter, breath fogging the glass. Her heart froze. Out on the ridge, barely visible in the dim light, dark shapes stood against the snow. Not gone, not deterred, watching. She turned sharply, her voice low but urgent. They're still there. Daniel was already awake, his hand closing over the rifle. He rose to his feet, eyes hard, steady. No one else spoke. No one needed to. The truth had settled on them all. The storm had bought them one night of peace. No more. The ridge was no trick of the dawn. As the light spread slowly across the frozen land, the shapes remained unmoving, silent, watching. It was as if the wilderness itself had grown eyes and fixed them upon the cabin. The women gathered near the fire, but their glances kept darting to the shuttered window. None of them spoke above a whisper. Fear, once a shadow, was now a weight pressing into every breath. Daniel strapped his knife to his belt and pulled on his coat. They'll come, he said simply, his tone flat, matter of fact. No one argued. The truth was etched clearly across the horizon. Clara's hands clenched around the iron poker she still refused to set down. Let them try, she muttered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the fear beneath her defiance. Greta shook her head, her arms still around Emma's shoulders. They won't stop with threats this time, she said softly. The morning crawled with tension. Every sound, every groan of timber, every howl of the wind felt like footsteps creeping closer. Daniel worked without pause, bracing shutters with thick planks, stacking snow against the walls to dampen fire. He showed them how to move buckets of water close to the hearth, how to place logs within reach. His movements were quick, precise, like a man who had long ago learned that hesitation was death. The women helped as best they could. Clara carried wood, jaw tight. Greta stitched scraps of cloth into makeshift bandages, muttering prayers under her breath. Sophia fed the fire with trembling hands, refusing to let her weakness keep her idle. Emma tried to help, but stumbled under the weight of even a small log. Daniel caught her before she fell, steadying her with a hand. Keep watch instead, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. She nodded, grateful for a task she could manage. It was Hannah who shadowed him most closely. When he placed the second rifle in her hands, her breath hitched. "I don't know how," she whispered. His eyes met hers briefly, steady, unflinching. "You'll learn." He guided her fingers to the stock, to the trigger, his patience steady as stone. Her hands trembled at first, but under his silent instruction they steadied. She felt the weight of the weapon not just in her palms, but in her chest, a responsibility heavier than fear. By midday the sky had darkened again, heavy clouds dragging low as if the land itself held its breath. The storm had not fully left, it lingered, preparing to return with its fury. The women gathered near the window, peering out. The ridge was empty now, but emptiness felt worse than shadows. "They're hiding," Sophia whispered, clutching Greta's sleeve. Clara spat onto the floorboards. "Good. Let them hide. We'll be ready." But Greta shook her head. "We're not soldiers. We're barely alive as it is." She looked toward Daniel. "If they come with fire, this cabin won't hold." Daniel was silent a long moment. Then he said, "A cabin's not worth more than a life. But while you're in it, we fight." The words fell heavy, but they sparked something inside the women, a fragile thread of courage woven from his resolve. Clara straightened, her chin lifting. Sophia clutched the small knife she had hidden in her skirt. Greta drew Emma close, whispering, "If we must stand, we'll stand together." Hannah only watched Daniel, eyes steady, lips pressed thin with determination. That afternoon, they ate little. Their stomachs were knotted with dread. Daniel sat by the window, rifle across his knees, his gaze sweeping the white horizon. The women lingered behind him, every creak of the chair, every click of the rifle echoing in their bones. Hours dragged like years. The waiting was worse than the storm, worse than the cold. And then the sound came. Hooves. Not one, but many, pounding in rhythm against the frozen earth. The women froze, their breath caught in their throats. The noise grew louder, closer. Then came voices, sharp and cruel, carried easily on the wind. "Open up," a man bellowed, his tone filled with authority. "We know they're in there. Send them out before you damn yourself with them." Emma whimpered, burying her face in Greta's chest. Sophia trembled violently, clutching her knife with white knuckles. Clara stepped forward, her poker gripped like a sword. "Don't you dare open that door," she hissed. Hannah moved to Daniel's side, the rifle heavy in her hands, her eyes locked on the wood that shook beneath pounding fists. The door rattled under the impact of their blows. "You think you can keep them from us?" another voice shouted. "They belong to us. They always will. Send them out, or we'll burn you all." Daniel shifted, placing himself just off to the side of the door, finger resting on the trigger. "They walked away from your wagons," he called back, his voice low but steady. "They don't belong to you." Laughter answered him, bitter as frost. "They're cursed, rancher. And now so are you. You'll see the storm will take you next." Inside the cabin, fear pressed like a weight. Greta whispered prayers, Clara growled curses, Emma clung to her sister, Sophia trembled near the fire. Only Hannah stood unmoving, her shoulder almost brushing Daniel's as she faced the door. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the noise outside faded. Hooves retreating, voices swallowed by distance. But the silence they left was heavier than their threats. Clara exhaled a harsh laugh. "They'll be back. With more." Daniel said nothing. He only sat once more, rifle across his knees, his face carved from stone. Yet his silence told them all they needed to know. The storm outside howled again, rattling shutters, shaking the timbers. Inside, 6 souls sat waiting, 5 women abandoned by cruelty, and 1 man who had chosen to stand against it. The air was thick with fear, but also with something stronger. A vow, unspoken but real. The next time they came, the cabin would not surrender quietly. The storm broke before dawn, leaving the land buried in silence, so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. The cabin stood hunched beneath the snow, smoke rising stubbornly from its chimney. Inside, the fire glowed faint, but the air was heavy with unease. None of them had slept deeply. Every groan of timber, every rush of wind had been enough to jolt them awake, hearts hammering, hands reaching for makeshift weapons. Daniel stood by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. His rifle rested across his arms, ready, his jaw set hard. Behind him, the women lingered near the fire, whispering in low tones. Clara paced like a caged wolf, muttering curses under her breath. Greta coaxed Emma to eat a crust of bread, though the girl's hands shook so violently she could barely hold it. Sophia hummed faintly, a sound more for herself than for anyone else, as though clinging to a shred of calm. Hannah sat apart, rifle balanced awkwardly across her lap, her gaze fixed on Daniel's back. The first sound came just after noon, a distant crunch of hooves on the frozen crust. All at once, the cabin stilled. Daniel's head lifted. Clara froze mid-step. Greta's spoon slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. The rhythm grew louder, joined by voices, rough and cruel, carried on the wind. "They're here," Hannah whispered. Daniel turned, his voice low but steady. "Stay close to the fire. Do what you must. Don't wait for permission." His words were not a speech, but a command shaped by necessity. The pounding came next, fists slamming against the cabin door, shaking the frame so violently the women gasped. "Open up," a voice barked, sharp as a whip. "We know they're inside. Send them out, or you'll all burn." Daniel shifted to the side of the door, rifle raised. His reply was iron. "They're not yours." Laughter split the air, followed by the scrape of boots on snow. Then came the unmistakable crack of wood splintering as the settlers rammed the door with their shoulders. The women clutched at one another, panic surging through the room. Greta pulled Emma close, whispering prayers. Clara gripped the poker with both hands, teeth bared. Sophia pressed herself against the wall, trembling. Hannah stood nearest to Daniel, her rifle clutched tightly, though her knuckles were white with fear. The door shuddered again, louder, harder. Then a window shattered. A torch flew through the opening, flames licking at the floor before Greta and Sophia scrambled to douse it with snow water. Smoke curled through the cabin, sharp and choking. Daniel fired through the broken window. The rifle's cracks split the air, echoing across the valley. A man outside screamed, falling into the snow. Clara shouted in savage triumph, brandishing the poker like a sword. Another torch arced through the air, hissing as it struck the snow piled high against the wall. Sparks flew, but the storm's damp weight smothered them. The cabin became chaos. The settlers roared outside, their shadows shifting against the snow. Gunshots cracked, splinters flying from the cabin walls. Daniel reloaded quickly, his movements steady despite the storm of noise. Hannah knelt beside him, fumbling with cartridges, her hands trembling until his steady voice guided her. "Slow. Breathe. Now hand it over." She obeyed, and together they found a rhythm load. Fire, reload. Clara charged to the shattered window, hurling a bucket of boiling water into the night. A scream rose from outside, sharp and furious. Greta, driven by desperation, grabbed a hatchet and swung it against the doorframe where hands clawed to break through. Sophia clutched a kitchen knife, her breath ragged, tears streaking her face, but her grip unyielding. Emma, trembling, clung to Greta's skirt yet whispered, "Don't let them take us. Please don't let them take us." The settlers pressed harder. Flames flared against the cabin wall. Smoke thickened, stinging their eyes. Daniel's rifle cracked again, dropping another shadow in the snow. But more voices rose, louder, closer. Cruelty had brought an army. Then the door burst inward, with splintering. A broad-shouldered man stepped through, smoke and snow swirling around him. His eyes gleamed cold, his mouth twisted in a sneer. "End of the line," he spat, lifting his rifle toward the cowering women. Hannah moved before she could think, stepping between him and the others. The second rifle raised though her hands shook violently. The man laughed, cruel and sharp. "You'll fire that at me, girl? You haven't the heart." But Daniel did. The crack of his shot filled the cabin. The man staggered, eyes wide in disbelief, before crumpling to the floor. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Then outside, panic erupted. The remaining settlers shouted in confusion, stumbling back as the storm rose once more, wind howling, snow lashing against their torches until they hissed and died. One by one, their voices faded into the distance. The sound of retreat carried on the wind, swallowed by the storm. Inside, the cabin reeked of smoke and gunpowder. The women slumped against the walls, their weapons slipping from weak hands. Clara laughed, ragged and wild, half relief and half hysteria. Greta rocked Emma in her arms, whispering, "It's over. For now, it's over." Sophia sobbed quietly into her hands. Hannah still stood, the rifle trembling in her grip, her eyes locked on Daniel. He lowered his weapon slowly, his face carved from stone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then his words came, low and rough. "We're not done. They'll come again." The truth of it sank into the room like a weight. They had survived the first assault, but cruelty was not so easily defeated. The storm outside might smother tracks and cover blood, but the men who had abandoned 5 women to die in the snow would not surrender so quickly. And when they returned, it would be with vengeance sharpened. Night fell heavy, the storm rolling in once more as if the land itself prepared for the reckoning to come. The cabin walls groaned under the weight of wind, yet inside, silence pressed thicker than the snow outside. The women sat close to the fire, their faces pale but resolute, while Daniel checked his rifle for the 3rd time, his movements calm, deliberate. "They'll return," he said at last, his voice carrying the finality of truth. "With more men. With fire." Clara slammed her fist against the table. "Then let them. We're not running." Her eyes flashed with fury, but beneath it lived a fear so raw it made her hand shake when she reached for the poker. Greta smoothed Emma's hair, her voice quiet but steady. "God give us strength, because they won't stop until one of us is gone." Sophia clutched her knife tighter, lips moving in silent prayer. Hannah's gaze remained fixed on Daniel, her rifle balanced across her lap, her posture calm though her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might shake the cabin itself. They did not have to wait long. Just before dawn, shadows appeared at the treeline. Dozens this time. Torches blazed like angry stars, their glow smeared by the snow-laden wind. Voices carried, cruel and sharp. "Send them out, rancher. Last chance." Daniel stood, pulling his hat low, rifle across his shoulder. He looked at the 5 women gathered by the fire, faces pale, eyes wide, breath shallow. He saw the defiance in Clara, the devotion in Greta, the trembling courage in Sophia, the fragile will of Emma, and the steady fire of Hannah. He gave a single nod, a silent vow. Then he spoke, his words low, almost a growl. "We stand." The first shot shattered the night. Glass splintered from the window, a bullet burying itself in the wall. The women gasped, but Daniel did not flinch. He raised his rifle and fired back, his shot clean, precise. A cry rose from outside. The battle had begun. Torches flew through the broken window, flames hissing against the snow they had stacked high inside. The women scrambled, dousing sparks with buckets of water. Clara hurled another pot of boiling broth out into the storm, the scream of a man carrying back through the howling wind. Greta swung her hatchet against the doorframe as hands clawed to pry it open. Sophia stabbed with her knife when a shadow slipped too close, her tears blinding, but her arm unrelenting. Emma clung to Greta's skirts, whispering, "Don't let them take us. Don't let them," over and over until her voice cracked. Daniel moved with grim determination, every shot measured, every movement precise. Hannah knelt beside him, reloading as fast as her trembling hands would allow, her fear burning away into focus under his calm voice. "Breathe. Now. Hand it over." Together they moved in rhythm, fire, reload, fire again, 2 lives bound in the chaos of survival. The storm itself rose in fury, snow slashing sideways, wind howling like a beast. Torches sputtered, some dying in the gale. But cruelty did not retreat so easily. A figure loomed in the doorway, broad-shouldered, his eyes gleaming with hatred. The leader. His voice cut through the chaos. "You think you can keep them from us? They're cursed, rancher, and you'll die with them." He shoved forward, rifle raised, smoke and snow swirling around him. For a heartbeat, time froze. The women shrank back, the firelight flickering against their terrified faces. Hannah stepped forward without hesitation, planting herself between the intruder and Daniel. Her hands shook, but her eyes blazed. "You'll not take us," she said, her voice breaking but fierce. The man sneered. "You haven't the heart." But Daniel did. The crack of his rifle thundered through the cabin. The leader staggered, eyes wide, before collapsing to the floor with a final thud. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged sound of breathing. Outside, the storm rose higher, wind screaming through the trees. Leaderless, the settlers faltered. Shouts turned to curses, then to cries of retreat. One by one, their shadows vanished into the snow, swallowed by the white fury of the land. Inside, the cabin fell still. Smoke curled from the hearth, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Weapons slipped from weary hands. Clara laughed, wild and ragged, half relief and half hysteria. Greta pulled Emma tight against her chest, whispering, "It's over. It's finally over." Sophia sobbed, her knife clattering to the floor. Hannah lowered the rifle slowly, her arms trembling from exhaustion. She turned to Daniel, her eyes wide, searching his face. "You kept us," she whispered. He looked at her, at all of them, 5 women cast away by cruelty, now bound to him by fire, storm, and defiance. His voice was quiet, rough, yet certain. "We kept each other." The fire roared once more as wood was added. Wounds were tended: Clara's cut hand, Sophia's bruised arm, the graze along Daniel's shoulder. Their movements were slow, weary, but no longer desperate. Dawn crept into the cabin, pale gold spilling across the floorboards. The women stood at the doorway, gazing at the horizon. The world beyond was still cruel, still dangerous, but together they had carved something fierce and unbreakable. Daniel stood among them, rifle lowered now, no longer a weapon but a companion. Hannah's hand brushed his, tentative, unsure. He did not pull away. Outside, the snow stretched endless, hiding the tracks of the fallen, erasing the scars of battle. Inside, 6 souls bound not by blood, but by choice breathed as one. And though cruelty would never vanish from the world, they had learned something stronger than fear: the power of refusing to surrender, and the family born in fire and storm. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.